Hard not to root for him. Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks didn't let the ring ceremony distract them from their title defense. Giannis had 32 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists to lead the Bucks to a 127-104 victory over the Brooklyn Nets, who are the title favorites. Kevin Durant led the Nets with 32 points, 11 rebounds. Patty Mills, James Harden adding 21 and 20 respectively. The Nets were missing star guard Kyrie Irving, who isn't with the team due to his refusal to get a COVID-19 vaccine. KD, what's on your mind after the loss?
If Kyrie was there, you stopping both of them? You ain't stopping both of them. Somebody gonna put on a show. Somebody gonna help KD out, okay? And if it wasn't Harden, it would have been Kyrie. So I get it's the first game of the season. It's no big deal or whatever. But all I'm saying is bringing up Kyrie is that I found myself looking at them and I'm like, damn.
What if?
What if? If Kyrie were there, it wouldn't have been lopsided. It wouldn't have been like this. Now, everybody gonna talk about, you ain't gonna stop Giannis. So what? So what? You ain't stopping KD either. Okay? KD gonna get his. But in the end, Giannis got help. He got a team that's locked in, on the same page as him, focused, no ulterior motives, no different agenda. It's one. And they're all aligned together and they follow his lead. And that is the difference that you see in the Milwaukee Bucks compared to the Brooklyn Nets last night.
We did it. We finally did it. We couldn't do this without you guys either. So thank you.
Funny how they used to hate, now they hit my phone calling that they need some. Yeah, that's why it's only family with me when I walk through, they gon' see us. Now they got us on the road, really in the mode.
Blake Griffin on a rack attack. Euro. Oh, some English on it.
At any moment I'ma blow now, so countdown, I ain't stressing.
A one-man wrecking crew.
We're all excited for the ring and seeing our banner, and we're able to get the win.
To get hurt. Do you think Milwaukee wins a championship?
No.
Okay.
No.
Did you question Kyrie's commitment when they were in the playoffs, when things were getting serious, ready to play?
I did not.
You questioned it a little bit during the regular season.
I did not. No, hold on, wait a minute. But the regular season mattered.
I want to get into this whole thing. It's, we better wake up pretty quickly. So Kim and I love gold, and we have tons of gold, physical gold. I don't hold paper. We don't hold paper gold. We don't hold ETFs, and we don't own mining shares except for a few companies that we did start. So we're doing very well in gold. The concern I want to talk to you about right now is, like I said, Jim Reckers is a friend of mine, and I've been studying this Fed coin concept. And I don't know if one of the reasons gold is so important is simply because gold and silver are money. They've been there. We call it God's money, because I've been all over the world looking for gold and silver, trudged up and down mountainsides and seen sites that were built thousands of years ago by the Incas or the Chinese. And in 71, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, what else happened is our schools took the subject of gold out of study. I think it's so interesting, E.B. And then you work for a friend of mine. His name is Doug Casey. He and I were just in Cancun together about 3 weeks ago. And we're the old guys been, singing from the hymnal of gold for all these years. And then now we have crypto or Fed coin. So what is your prognosis on this whole industry going from what I call God's money to people's money or crypto money, which was Bitcoin, and then now the Fed is realizing that Bitcoin was kicking their butt, and they better get into Fed coin, or whatever we call it right now.
Digital currency.
Digital. Yeah. What do you see happening?
Because I thought that was a really good question. I used to collect taxes for the state of Louisiana. I had my title was like Secretary of the Department of Revenue or something, but I was a tax collector. Of course there's a tax gap. Duh. I mean, we have a voluntary system. And when we first imposed an income tax in America, and the constitutionality of it was litigated, I think our lawmakers in our judicial branch decided, well, we need to strike a balance here between people's privacy. I'm not sure they used the word privacy then, but between people's privacy and public policy of catching people who cheat. And the way you do that is through audits. And the IRS, look, it's an extraordinarily inefficient agency. Any of you have a tax question? Go call the IRS this afternoon. See what happens. You can't even get them on the phone. I mean, it's ludicrous. What are they going to do with all this data? The second point I want to make, I don't think you can understate the risk that this data could leak. I mean, we just had an instance. Some of my colleagues talked about it, where financial data of taxpayers was leaked, I think by the IRS. And the IRS said they'd get to the bottom of it. Have you heard anything? Have y'all asked? I haven't. And you know what? We won't. And we remember what happened with Lois Lerner. You know, it just depends on what kind of, I've talked too long. It depends on what kind of state you want to live in. Do you folks really want to live in a state where the government knows every one of the intimate details of your life, including finances? If you do, I hear China's beautiful this time of year. I said too much. I'm sorry. I'm leaving. You did a good job, great folks.
A lot of hands here. I'm going to start here, and then we'll rotate back and forth.
Well, I mean, it's a financial prison. Chapter 17 of my book, I have a chapter on FedCoin. It's a term that I first came up with in 2016 when people didn't even know what Bitcoin was, and we were talking about FedCoin, which shows that we're a little out of touch. We realize people need to stair step into these ideas, but FedCoin has been in the works for a long time. If you think about it, the United States uses the dollar as a weapon around the world. Okay, you hear this all the time. Russia is bad. We're going to use sanctions against people there. Iran is bad. We're going to use sanctions. What are these sanctions? These sanctions will block you out of using any sort of modern day currency in the financial system. And of course, Bitcoin has been a workaround for some people. And if you are a technocrat that likes to run around the world and smack people, you know, when they don't obey your orders or they conflict with what you want to do, you don't want things that allow people to get around that. So it's totally logical that the currency would evolve. Now, what does FedCoin do? FedCoin is a digital currency idea that would replace the dollar. Now, it wouldn't replace $1 bills or something, because you still have to have something to, you know, buy a soda with or whatever you consume. I mean, we're talking about moving regular amounts of money, buying things, and the average person would get used to having a digital wallet. That's now a term that you're comfortable with, right? Remember, 20 years ago, we talked about an e-dollar, and everybody said, this is terrible. We can't do this. But now, everyone's comfortable with the digital wallet. I mean, even older generations are comfortable with the idea of having digital money.
And the capstone I want to put on is you are, if not the longest serving CEO of a publicly traded company in your industry, one of certainly the top. And, you know, in an era where CEOs and public companies, are constantly like in fear of losing their job, you've navigated through insane storms, including the .com crash, including the 2008 crisis, including COVID. So it's, I think you said at one point you actually went through a 98% loss in shareholder value and still managed to keep your job. So just understanding how profoundly difficult that is. Now, I will credit it to something, and then you can tell me if I'm crazy. What I credit it to is not only your ability to sort of analogize something like the chambered nautilus, but that you think from first principles. And that's what I found so compelling in your analysis of Bitcoin, is just reducing it down to first principles. So wouldn't it be great for you to define what first principles are so that people understand that, and then for the rest of the interview we can sort of build on how that plays out in crypto.
Yeah, I think probably the most valuable thing that I learned from MIT was to think from first principles and to be intellectually fearless. It's on one hand, in my personal life, I'm an investor, And in my public life, I run a Main Street company. I run a software company that has people that manufactures software that does things. So what I saw was if you had a large portfolio of stocks or assets and you went into this pandemic, after the Fed ended up expanding the money supply with the interest rates going to zero and the expansion of the M2 monetary base, the money base, you found that you were actually 25, 30% wealthy or doing nothing. You could have done nothing the entire year. As long as, right, the only mistake you could have made is do something, right? If you had $1 billion and you did nothing for the entire year, you had $1.3 billion at the end of the year. On the other hand, if you had a Main Street company and you're generating, let's say, $100 million a year in cash flow and you're valued at $1 billion because of the cash flow, you would have to be generating $130 million after a year to be valued the same, because the value, the assets that the money buy is being devalued by 30%. If the currency is devalued at some rate, and the money supply expanded to 24% last year, so you could use that as your metric, or you could use the S&P 500's return as another metric. But clearly, the currency devalued, which means that if you're a Main Street company, you had to work 20% harder to get nothing. And if you're a Wall Street company, you had to do nothing to get 20% better. And so what I saw was a shift in balance of power, and a shift in wealth. And it was pretty disturbing to me too. It's like, you don't want to be the dentist working for a fixed amount of money that's getting 20% less valuable every year.
So the average person, I think, struggles with that because they're like, well, I'm getting my stimulus check. What do you mean? Like, how's this going down? Cost of bread's the cost of bread. I'm all good.
I think there are some fundamental misnomers or understandings of the world that people miss. And the most pernicious one is the idea that inflation equals CPI.
Which is Consumer Price Index. Average shit.
The idea that there is a number for inflation. Inflation is only 2%, or inflation is 1%, or inflation might be 3%. Okay, that's just a mistaken idea. What is inflation? Inflation is the rate at which the things you want to buy are going up in price. And what are the things you want to buy? Well, you might want to buy pizza, might want to buy Netflix, but you might want to buy a house. You might want to rent a house, but if you want to rent a house, it might not go up in price as much as if you want to buy a house. What if you want to buy a house in the middle of Manhattan? It might go up in price differently than a house in the middle of Kansas. What if I want to buy food? What if I want to buy energy? What if I want to buy a Picasso? Or what if I want to buy something truly scarce? What if I want season tickets to, the baseball game? What if I want health care? What if I want early retirement? They're all things you can buy. You can buy assets. You can buy luxury service. You want to buy a Rolex? You want to buy a Maserati or a Porsche? Luxury goods, or do you want to buy commodity goods? And there are some things you don't have to pay for, right? They're ad finance, right? Streaming YouTube. What's that? What's the inflation rate on streaming YouTube? Ad finance, right? So the inflation is the cost of stuff. If the money supply is expanding, that means the currency is devaluing. In a closed system, if we want to make that simple, I live in a town and there's 1,000 houses, and I double the amount of currency in the town, and everybody wants a house. What's the price of houses do, right? If the only thing I can buy is a house, and if I double the amount of currency, then the price of the house must go up. Probably go up by 2, but maybe not exactly by 2, but it goes up. If I increase the amount of money, if I raise everybody's salary by a factor of 10, and I keep the number of houses constant, one might presume that the price of houses will go up. How will inflation actually take place? Well, there's a different coefficient for the price gradient, the change in price for everything you might want to buy, and it's different at every point in time. So, for example, if I put you in lockdown and I make it illegal to go to the movies and I make it illegal to go to a restaurant, then the price of restaurants and movie theaters aren't going to go up. If I make it illegal to or inappropriate to go on a cruise and fly in an airplane, then the price of cruise tickets and movie theater tickets and restaurants, they just don't go up because you can't buy them if you want to. There's no velocity on that money. Okay, what can you buy? You can buy stocks. You can buy crypto, right? So what does go up? Well, if I give you $1,000 and you can go and you can buy stocks, then the price of stocks go up. Now, what happens next? Well, so everybody gets locked into their apartment and they decide they really want a house with grass. So what happened next? Well, 12 weeks after the lockdowns, the price of like suburban housing went up and people started trying to buy houses. They said, this is unprecedented. We've never had so much demand for houses in the suburbs of New York. Well, that's not a surprise. You know what, if your choice is, if I close the parks in the cities and I close your office, then why wouldn't you move out into the country and live at a house with green grass, right? You're not the utility. You're not missing out on a restaurant. You're not missing out on a park. You're not missing out on your job. So rational human behavior causes people to take their money and go buy things they want. And where do they buy them? Well, Hampton's real estate went up in price 50%. Palm Beach, they go to the places where they want to go. Did the price of land in the middle of North Dakota go up by 50%? Not so much. It's not a scarce, desirable asset by people stampeding. So what is inflation? Inflation is a vector. It's not a scalar. A vector means you can calculate for 1,000 different products, 1,000 different numbers, and they change every month. So I could give you 1,000 different numbers 12 different times a year, and it would be different in every city. Everybody can figure out that in Minot, North Dakota, it's different than Manhattan. And it's even different in Manhattan than in Brooklyn, and it's different in Brooklyn than in upstate New York. So inflation is varying by time, by space, and it's varying by every item. And if you want to calculate the inflation index, you have to construct a market basket of goods and services and assets that you would want to acquire. And then I can give you the rate at which that market basket of goods and services and assets is changing every month or every week. Of course, that would be different for every person. So what happened after the lockdowns? Well, we got hyperinflation in some things. Bonds hyperinflated. Cost of bonds doubled in 3 weeks.
Kim, what's on your radar?
Alongside the thousands of working class who have resisted vaccine mandates, we're now beginning to see a string of high-profile resignations and refusals as well. People willing to give up millions of dollars. And we've heard about the thousands of employees in a variety of sectors unwilling to adhere to the mandates: hospitals, care facilities, police and fire departments, restaurants, hotels, and airlines are amongst the many industries under increased strain from workers protesting. But now we're starting to hear about the high-profile people resisting and threatening their jobs as well. 2 days ago, popular conservative radio and television talk show host Dan Bongino announced live on air to his radio syndicator Cumulus that he will quit over the mandates.
Imagine the countless number of individuals trying to explain to these companies. Ever thought of that? The countless numbers of moms and dads who are sitting at some kitchen table explaining to their kids how they may have to move out, how daddy doesn't have a job, because a bunch of people in a C-suite thought it'd be a good idea to sit around and play pretend Dr. Fauci for a moment and mandate people jam something in their bodies that they don't want to take. You ever put yourself in that role? You ever put yourself at that kitchen table with mom and dad telling their kids that? Imagine how the kids respond, that fear they got to live with. You know, I grew up without a lot of money. My mom used to make bologna sandwiches for dinner. And when the bologna was no good, you'd cook it and you'd make it good right quick, right? I'm not leaving any of those guys behind. You can have me or you can have the mandate. But you can't have both of us.
Now, Dan Bongino is himself fully vaccinated. He has been battling cancer and is currently in remission. However, he ideologically opposes mandates and is willing to give up his partnership with Cumulus if they choose to threaten people with injections in order to keep their jobs. Bongino also works for Fox News, which has a vaccine mandate with a test option for its unvaccinated employees and seems to be okay with that. But he's willing to risk his radio show, which is very popular and heard in over 300 cities. His contract is no doubt worth millions of dollars, and that's a lot of money to walk away from. Washington State University's head football coach and 4 assistant coaches were fired yesterday for not complying with their state's vaccine mandate. The head coach, Nick Rolovich, is walking away from a $3.2 million annual salary. The world's #1 men's tennis player, Novak Djokovic, will likely miss the Australian Open, a Grand Slam tournament of which he is the reigning champion over his refusal to reveal his vaccination status. Djokovic is risking his ranking and sponsors worth millions of dollars by refusing to comply. Also, NBA player Kyrie Irving, the Nets superstar point guard, will be sitting out this season over his refusal to be vaccinated. This decision could cost him his whopping $186 million contract. Now, I'm sure this isn't the last of the high-profile resignations we'll be hearing about over the next couple of months as vaccine mandates come closer to their enforcement dates. The idea behind the mandates is to make workplaces safer by preventing transmission. This is why Biden has tasked OSHA with enforcing his federal vaccine mandate laws. But many people wonder if their employer would be liable for any adverse reactions after requiring the vaccine as a condition of employment. On OSHA's website, under frequently asked questions, when asked whether or not adverse reactions to the vaccine are recordable on the OSHA's record-keeping log, the published answer says this, quote, "The Department of Labor and OSHA, as well as other federal agencies, are working diligently to encourage COVID-19 vaccinations. OSHA does not wish to have any appearance of discouraging workers from receiving COVID-19 vaccination and also does not wish to disincentivize employers' vaccination efforts. As a result, OSHA will not enforce recording requirements to require any employers to record worker side effects from COVID-19 vaccination, at least through May 2022. We will reevaluate the agency's position at that time to determine the best course of action moving forward." Now, this is a change to OSHA's previously published enforcement guidance, which required employers to record adverse events for required COVID vaccinations, not for recommended ones, to ensure workers retain the right to file workers' comp claims. However, now that OSHA is removing the recording requirement from their guidelines, it's unclear at the moment whether or not employees could seek damages. But let's move on to the reason for the mandates to prevent transmission. Now, according to the New York Times, the 5 top states with the current highest rates of increased transmission are Connecticut, New Mexico, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Also, according to the New York Times, these 5 states are heavily vaccinated, 4 of which are in the top 5 most vaccinated states in the country, with New Mexico in the top 10. Research conducted by a Harvard professor titled, quote, "Increases in COVID-19 are unrelated to levels of vaccination across 68 countries and 2,947 counties in the United States," unquote, was recently published in the European Journal of Epidemiology. The paper concluded that there was no correlation between vaccination rates and community spread of the virus. Though it was originally reported that vaccines would prevent you from getting COVID, what they have shifted to saying now is that vaccines help reduce your chances of having a severe outcome. So if you want to reduce your risk of ending up in the hospital or dying from COVID, the vaccine is one of your best shots at risk reduction, pun intended. But all of this data seriously and the wave of protests and resignations calls into question the need to continue to double down on highly divisive mandatory vaccinations, which are causing a ripple effect of harm to our economy and to our community. One thing I also want to point out is that with all of these mandates, you know, when you're looking around the world, it'd be one thing if they continue to double down on the mandates as more data came out showing that the vaccines were in fact safer and safer. You know, we're getting this body of evidence coming in. But instead, we're seeing some concerning trends. Like in Scandinavia, they have now limited the use of Moderna or banned the use of Moderna altogether. Iceland, I believe, banned it altogether, but the other Scandinavian countries, the other 4, have limited its use for people under 30 or in some cases under 18. And they've also banned Johnson & Johnson's vaccine for anyone under the age of 65. And so, when you're looking at these mandates and saying you've got to take this or you can't have a job, and then people are kind of reading the news and they're saying, well, but the spread, it's not stopping the spread, it seems. Yeah. It's, they're banning it in certain, they're questioning the safety profile in certain other highly advanced countries.
So FedCoin does a few things. Number one, it makes it impossible.
Hang on. Yeah. Shane, I don't even use cash anymore because I'd rather have a credit card. So what's the difference between a credit card and FedCoin?
So the thing that FedCoin will do is it will give centralized control. That's what people need to see, is that there's centralized control. So every single FedCoin, just like every Bitcoin, has a history attached to it. You've started to see now where there's a alleged ransomware attack. And they say the brilliant people at the DOJ and NSA have tracked down the recipient of this Bitcoin and pulled it back from their digital wallet. Well, wait a minute. I thought it was totally anonymous, like it was a Swiss bank account in my pocket, but it's not. Everything is tracked, so you can trace these Bitcoin transactions back to the original user, and then you can.
Digital wallet, they'll be able to trace every move you make, everything you spend, where you are.
That's right. So, and you've probably been, stuck on a plane or something and played liar's poker with $1, right? So you look at $1 and there's all these serial numbers, and it's a game where you can guess the serial numbers on the dollar. Well, every dollar is a serial number. Every Fed coin will be recorded and enshrouded on this blockchain. And people say, well, blockchain, I've heard of that. That's good. You can make money off that. Do you see how the narrative now supports people going along with this Fed coin? But what happens is we say, Robert, you have been making a lot of statements that we don't agree with. And you've been encouraging people not to trust their elected leaders. And Robert, a lot of things are bothering us. So we're going to restrict your Fed coin wallet and allow you to only spend on basic necessities. This is absolutely possible on a blockchain, and then it eliminates tax evasion. So there's no way you can evade taxes because every Fed coin is recorded on this blockchain and every transaction tracked. So as you can see, if you are a control-minded person, you would think this is great.
Yeah. So anyway, the thing we want to discuss here is that, I'm so old. I remember when credit cards came out.
Yeah.
And then now I'd rather use a credit card because it's easier, yada, yada, yada. But that comes from a bank. Then we have the Fed. Then Bitcoin came out. So Kim and I bought into it simply because we always believe in starting small and then understanding the system, how it works. And then now we're talking about a possible Federal Reserve coin. And I want to know what's going to happen to Goldman Sachs, all the other banks out there right now, if the Fed just takes control of the whole thing.
The Biden administration seems to be breaking rules left and right, with the president leading the way as he and the First Lady were caught on tape violating D.C.'s indoor mask mandate at a pricey Italian restaurant in Georgetown. Meantime, his vice president is accused of violating IRS federal law, the one that prohibits tax-exempt houses of worship from engaging in overt political activity. This after she appeared in a video now being shown at 300 churches across Virginia, where she actually encourages viewers to vote for gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe. Watch this.
We were taught that it was our sacred responsibility to raise our voice and lift up the voices of our community. One of the most significant ways I believe that we can each use our voice is through our vote. So Virginians, you have the opportunity now to raise your voice through your vote, because it's election time. I believe that my friend Terry McAuliffe is the leader Virginia needs at this moment.
Trouble for the Veep. The Virginia governor's race also sparking trouble for White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, with a government watchdog group filing an ethics complaint against her, claiming she violated the Hatch Act by seeming to endorse McAuliffe during a briefing. Take a listen.
I have to be a little careful about how much political analysis I do from here and not traipse into that too much. Look, I think the president, of course, wants former Governor McAuliffe to be the future governor of Virginia. There is alignment on a lot of their agenda, whether it is the need to invest in rebuilding our roads, rails, and bridges, or making it easier for women to rejoin the workforce. We're going to do everything we can to help former Governor McAuliffe, and we believe in the agenda he's representing.
Jason, in just 36 to 48 hours time, you have 3 ethical violations. But I think what makes this so grating and galling is this former soundbite from Jen Psaki.
We have the highest ethical standards of any administration in history. A number of ethics officials have conveyed that, and we're proud of that. We have also staffed up at an unprecedented pace, and this is the most diverse administration in American history. So we certainly expect that everyone will abide by those high ethics standards. That applies in how we operate. It also applies in how hiring is done.
I just can't imagine that you go from one place and telling millions of people as their elected leader, this is how we're going to do things to keep you safe. We're never going to have mandates, but we're going to trust you with the science, to having mandates and not trusting anybody. And now to not wearing a mask even when you're mandated to. I don't know. The hypocrisy doesn't seem like the right word. It's bull hockey.
It is, and I like that analogy about what you find under your shoe. I was on a farm yesterday.
I know, it was great with you and Blake at the pumpkin patch.
Thank you. Well, the Democrat hypocrisy runs deep. Let's scroll it up. We have a full list, and we'll scroll it, Emily. As you point out, small businesses don't seem to get the same pass as these jokers whose names are on our screen.
Yeah, you guys, so look, your tax dollars are paying the salaries of these people, and your tax dollars are being used to prosecute your fellow Americans for lack of COVID compliance. And then these guys throw it in your face by not wearing masks, by flaunting the rules. It's so much more than rules for thee, not for thee, rules for me, not for thee, however that phrase is. It's so much deeper than that. Remember the restaurant Farm Boy in Washington State? They endured fines of up to $2,000 a day, at one point totaling almost $90,000 in 8 days. The owner was threatened with jail time, prosecuted with contempt, thanks to your federal tax dollars, because the Department of Labor and Industries agent drove by and happened to see it open. Without a trace of irony, the judge said, "This is not for punishment. This is just to bring you in compliance." The owner said, "Look, this is purely a matter of survival." Remember Max Public House? 25 criminal summonses during the month of December, when homicides were up 22% and the highest amount of shootings since 2012. And they were indicted for operating without a license once all of their licenses were taken away. One woman taken off a plane, she was prosecuted, fined $40,000 for going maskless. Wow. So my point about bringing up these 3 examples is that when we see them in a restaurant, maybe Jen Psaki laughs it off, or these people laugh it off, "Oh, I'm sorry, mea culpa," but they are prosecuting fellow Americans for doing the best they can or making the same innocent mistake. It's absolutely reprehensible.
Kim, what's on your radar?
Is America headed for a civil war? I have never had this question posed to me more than over the past few months, and what seemed like an event that would never happen in our lifetimes, or really ever, has been on the brain of more and more people. We all watched this famous clip go viral last week.
We're just sick of it, and we're not gonna take it anymore. I see a civil war coming.
Well, many people just brushed her off as some sort of wacky QAnon Trump supporter who doesn't represent anyone except other people on the fringes of society. But is it true that very few Americans are thinking of a civil war? Is it really that fringe of a feeling? Well, according to a newly released poll from University of Virginia Center for Politics, a whopping 52% of Trump supporters and 41% of Biden supporters would favor a secession of red or blue states. Now, these are astonishing numbers. Nearly half the country would be okay with getting rid of the other half. There's been some crazy talk in the past, mostly coming from places like Texas about seceding from the Union, but it's never been taken too seriously. But the political division has been increasing at such a rapid pace over the past several years that now many people on both sides seem very open to just splitting the country in two. Andrew Yang, who is starting a third party called the Forward Party with the slogan, "Not left, not right, but forward," tweeted a Turchin and Goldstone poll released about a year ago, showcasing how the political division today is higher than it was right before the Civil War. Now, I don't think we really need a poll to tell us the tension is high, very high. I mean, many of us have family members who will not speak to us for one political reason or another. Political division today isn't just about a difference in ideas. The division is about morals. One group believes the other is evil or destructive in some way and must be stopped. And apparently, if they can't be stopped, then maybe it's best to just cut them out in the same way many are cutting their own family members out. On top of this deep resentment many are feeling for people on the other side of the aisle, there is a growing resentment against the country itself and the history of the country. People don't seem to love America as much as they once did, and the lack of united feeling could lead us one step closer to dividing up the nation. So if we were to reel into a civil war, what would it even look like? How would it happen? People seem to mistakenly believe that a civil war would entail their America-loving neighbor hunkering down in a man-made bunker with their stockpile of rifles, that it would be Republican versus Democrat inside of our own cities and communities at war with one another, or perhaps it would be a few rebellious militias trying to take on the full power of the U.S. military. But what's actually more likely is a scenario entirely different. If America were to reel into a civil war, it wouldn't look anything like what many people envision. Instead, a civil war would likely start when a state government defies the federal government in some way. The federal government would then try to negotiate with the state, but when that doesn't work, they'd try to coerce them by limiting access to certain federal resources. They'd essentially use the same tactics used in countries such as Venezuela and Iran. It wouldn't be full-on military engagement type of civil war. It would entail sanctions and embargoes. The federal government would use economic disaster to try and get the state to cave. The state, in order to protect their imports and exports, would deploy its National Guard to the state's lines, but that's likely the extent of the military engagement. The sanctions and embargoes would do the damage needed to attempt to strong-arm the state back into the Union. Some states would last longer than others if they're already more self-sufficient, but others may have to give up on their quest for independence against the feds a little earlier. In any case, a looming civil war isn't likely to result in people battling it out in gunfights within our neighborhoods and cities. It's likely to be less dramatic, but just as damaging. And given the current rising political temperature in the country, I'd say this scenario becomes more and more of a reality each passing day.
And if you know that inflation at some level exists, you've already got a problem. So when did you begin to think, okay, I've got this? In fact, what I'm really, the part that I find so intriguing about your story is when you turned to Wall Street and were like, I have a profitable company. It is wildly profitable. And yet Wall Street does not like it. Dear Wall Street, why do you not like my company? And the answer to this is so revealing.
Yeah, the company was valued at like 1x revenue plus cash. And I said, well, I have $500 million in cash. Why don't we get more credit? And the answer is cash is trash. Like it's Ray Dalio's quote, cash is trash. Well, why is cash trash? Well, if the money supply is expanding at 7% a year, then the risk-free hurdle rate is 7%. If you don't generate more than 7% yield on your cash, then it's devaluing. So from 2010 to 2020, the money supply expanded at 7%. So all the cash you're holding is losing 7% of its value, assuming you have a 0% interest rate or zero yield on the cash. So you can imagine the traditional world, you invest your cash at 3% treasury yields and you get a -7 and it's like a -4% and divide 4 into 72. And, and somewhere 15, 20 years out, you're going to lose half of the shareholder value in the treasury if you do that. People might hold their nose. But after March of 2000, the money supply is expanding at 24%. The interest rate's 0. So now you have to put a forecast in place. At what rate will the money supply expand? If it expands at 20% a year and you're going to generate 0 in treasury yield, then you're looking at cutting your treasury purchasing power in half in 3.5 years.
Whoa.
Okay, now that's not trivial. So you have to find a way if you're gonna have assets to get over the hurdle rate. Another way to say it is, I have to invest it in a strategy which is going to appreciate faster than the money is devalued. If the money is devalued at 7% a year, then the S&P 500 index better yield 9 or 10%. If it yields 10% and the money devalues at 7%, you're +3. You can save money in an S&P 500 index fund. You can't save money with bonds unless you're buying bonds and the interest rates keep getting reduced. If you bought a bond at 4% yield and the interest rate got taken down to 3.5%, the bond trades up. And when the interest rate goes down to 3%, it trades up again. And when it goes down to 2.5%, it trades up again. When the bond rates get, or the LIBOR, the short-term bond rate and interest rate goes to 0, you can't take it down anymore. So bonds won't hold value either. So now you're in a conundrum. I have a lot of assets, but I'm not beating the hurdle rate, and the hurdle just tripled. This is the problem that a company that's cash rich has, and it's a problem that anybody that works for a salary has, which is I generate a cash and the currency is being devalued every year. The real question is, what's the rate at which it's devalued? And let's do the thought experiment. What if we didn't print any more money? What if the inflation rate, the monetary inflation rate, not the CPI, but what if the money expansion rate was 0? In that case, the currency is also an asset, and it's a store of value and a medium of exchange at the same time. That's a complete Austrian economics, like deflationary economy, where we call it hard money or sound money. The closest thing to that would be the gold standard. If the government said you can exchange your money for gold at any time, and we'll keep gold equal to the amount of money, and we won't print any more money, well, that puts you on a hard money standard. In that case, you could just store your money in a bank and it would be more valuable in the future, not less valuable. When the government goes off the gold standard, and we went off the gold standard explicitly in 1971, now the currency is losing some percent of its purchasing power every year because it's being inflated away. And what's the number? Well, it was about 7% a year, and now it's like 20% a year, and 15 to 20% a year, and you got to figure out, is it 15, 20, or 25? But if it's 15 to 20, the currency is weakening 1 to 2% a month. When it gets to be 40 to 50, it's collapsing. That's Argentina, or worse. So you've either got a country where the currency is weakening or a country where the currency is collapsing. When that happens, now you have a decomposition. The money is broken into two components. You have a currency component, which you use as a legal medium of exchange, like the dollar or the euro or the yen or the renminbi. And then you have an asset component, which you use as a store of value over the long term. Money or US dollars have ceased to be a store of value for at least the past decade, since the great financial crisis. So what people did was they stampeded into ETFs and index funds, right? And to a certain extent, bonds, right? How do you store your value over the long term? Well, if I take money and I buy a mixture of stocks and bonds, that will store my value, because if the economy is healthy, the stocks go up by 10% a year. The S&P does. And if the market, the economy is not healthy, the Fed will lower the interest rates by 50 basis points, and the bond will trade up. And so that works for how long? It works, watch the interest rates for the last decade. It works until you crank the interest rates down to 0. It used to be overnight money was 550 basis points, Tom, before the great financial crisis. And then they cranked it down from 550 to 500 to 450 to 400 to 350 to 300 to 250 to 200 to 150 to 100 to 50 to 0. And now we have, the bankers say, I'm not even thinking about raising interest rates. So that breaks bonds as a store of value, unless you go negative interest rates. And stocks work, except for the fact that, what stocks worked in the past decade? Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, a big tech company that grows 20% a year top line. When Apple stopped growing 20% a year top line, they fixed it by taking on massive amounts of debt, buying their stock back, and leveraging up their EPS. So companies that grow faster than the rate of monetary inflation, faster than the 7%, they could hold value. A company growing 20% like Google, Facebook, or Amazon, they all hold value. In fact, they accrete value. Why? Because 20 is more than 7, right? So it's plus 13% a year, right? What happens to all the other companies? Which companies in the S&P 500 amounted to all the indexes, or to all the gains? It was big tech, right? Big FANG stocks were the winners. Everybody else treads water because if you're growing at 7% and the money supply is collapsing at 7%, you're net zero. And how else do you get around it? Well, you can go borrow a lot of money, leverage up, buy back half your stock, and get your cash flow per share up. But what happens when you're fully leveraged, which is like where they are right now? You can't do it anymore. So what's the problem right now? The problem today is the currency is being devalued at 20% a year, not 7% a year, right? I turned up the heat in the frying pan. And the second problem is some stocks could hope to grow 20% a year, like the minority, 5% of them could grow 20% a year for the past decade. What percentage of stocks can grow 30% a year? Because now you got to grow 30 or 35% a year because the hurdle rate just jumped. Now you're pushed out on the risk curve here. You got to take massive risk as a company to grow that fast. You got to do acquisitions. You got to burn the candle on both ends. You got to take on massive new leverage. This is squeezing. Value stocks don't work, right? I mean, it squeezes you out of the value stock trade because if the company is reliable and it's growing its cash flows 5% a year and the money supply is expanding at 20% a year, cash is trash. Back to my story, right? Why is cash trash? Because I had a value stock with a lot of cash and the money supply is expanding. Look at it from the point of view of an investor. They can invest in the S&P 500 index or the NASDAQ, and those were all up like 40% year over year or something, Or they could hold cash and get 0%. Nobody wants to hold cash. And so they might as well just take it and put it into something else. Now, long term, you can get a bump on equities when you have a boost, when interest rates get spiked down. You saw it. When we flood the market with liquidity, initially that makes stocks go up. But let's take the example of Zimbabwe and Argentina. If I keep doing it for 10 years, what happens to those stocks? They don't go up. Right? The problem over time is stocks are valued based upon the discounted value of the cash flows, or at least in part. And so if I give you a company generating $100 million in cash every year for the next decade, but I tell you there'll be 10 times as much money in the economy in a decade, that $100 million of cash will only be worth 1/10 as much in a decade. So the discount rate is jumping, which means the value of the cash flows into the future is collapsing. The road to serfdom is working exponentially harder for a currency growing exponentially weaker. And so how do you solve the problem? And the solution to the problem is you convert your assets from a weak currency that's inflating into a strong currency, or a strong asset, if you will, that is deflating.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And this is really a show about money, going back to what we call God's money, gold and silver. And then where we are today about gold and silver royalties, but also and then we all heard about Bitcoin. And now we're discussing with E.B. Tucker, the author of Why Gold Right Now. He also works for a good friend of mine, Doug Casey. And Doug and I are the old guys in this business. It's better the younger guys take over. But it's going so fast. And I was just listening to Jim Records, another friend of ours. He was talking about when the Fed coin comes out. And I've heard this number of times, EB, we don't need banks anymore. So just as truck drivers will be unemployed, bankers would be unemployed if it goes to total central planning, which is communism, and the banks control the central planners control everything. So we're talking about the past, present, and possible future of what we call money. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, I have a question, and we'll talk about the banks. I do have a question, EB, on the Fed coinlet. So you're saying it's already happening. It's already in the works. They've been planning this for a long time. What's the impact on gold and silver if this Fed coin comes out? Is it more valuable, less valuable?
Well, I mean, I think that the Chinese know the answer to that as we were talking. I mean, once you figure this out, it's too late. That's what people need to see about gold and silver. Yeah.
If the Chinese have figured it out, we're finished. Because
I mean, there's a great book about that called The Grand Chessboard, which lays out the policy in the 90s for, post-Soviet kind of world tension. I mean, there's always an enemy, right? So the Chinese will be probably our chosen enemy of the next decade. And that's, we know how that'll go. Okay. But the Chinese know something. I mean, it's an old society. They realize the value of gold. Now, once you have a Fed coin wallet, and as Robert said, once you're in, that type of centralized control, then you'll say, wait a second. I mean, I need something that's outside of that. Well, how do I get it? Well, now gold's illegal. It's too late. But see, everybody now can say, well, this sounds crazy. I mean, why would they do that? I mean, the government's here to help me. I mean, I know those friendly people at the airport are trying to protect me. They're not trying to give me a hard time. So basically, this is for thinking people. You just say, look, don't take it from me. Go back and look at the Soviet Union. I mean, there was an underground economy that thrived. It absolutely thrived. And if you didn't step out of bounds, you could kind of dance in and out of that. And then when things always change, I mean, centralized control never works. And the reason why it doesn't work is because what happens is that anybody that disagrees is an enemy, and you crush all the enemies. And once all the enemies are gone, then the state turns on itself. Well, so it never works.
As a U.S. Marine, the reason they want to take our guns away is they can have control if we're unarmed.
That's right.
But if we're armed, they'd be tough to come and take our gold or silver and our lives away. So that's why Biden is now pushing.
Robert, 100 years ago, the congressman in your town, he would have never gone along with some of these current efforts in Washington, because when he comes home, he would have had to face the people.
Yep.
But nowadays, he's got bodyguards. So anybody that challenges him, you say, well, these people are subversives. They need to be shut down, and their Fed coin wallet needs to be turned off, so they can't buy any, pipes or Molotov cocktails or anything, right? I mean, this is you can see how this goes.
So they can control everything. So, Ibi, let me give you the scenario that records and I see coming, and you can shoot holes in it. Okay. Right now, the way the system works is the Fed and the Treasury produce money. It goes into the big banks like Goldman and Wells Fargo. And then you and I walk up to the window, we deposit our money, we get our credit cards, and we take loans out there. Rickards and I suspect when it goes to the Fed coin, those big banks are gone. Because the big banks are what they call the transmission system, like the transmission of a car. But they take the transmission out because it's a Tesla now. Now, what's the possibility of that in the not too distant future?
Right. The simplest example is I'm a wealthy business person in Argentina, and the peso is trading 3 to the dollar, 3 pesos to the dollar, and the year is 2003. And now I can go forward and I tell you, well, in the year 2020, the peso is going to trade 150 to the dollar on the blue market or the black market. That's going to be the real rate. So what's your best strategy? Work hard, diversify into other Argentine companies making pesos? No. Your best strategy is convert all your existing pesos into dollars and get it out of the country. And your next best strategy is forward finance your cash flows and convert those into dollars, get them out of the country. And your next strategy is sell equity in your ranch or your business in pesos in 2003 at 3 to 1, 3 pesos to the dollar, and then buy dollars because the dollar is going to go up by a factor of 50. So what you're doing is you're financing in a weak currency, and then you're converting into a strong currency. And that's pretty obvious if you lived in Zimbabwe, or if you live, Lebanon went from 150 Lebanese lira to 700, it went from 1,500 to 7,500 overnight.
Whoa.
So it means you lost 80% of your money if you had it in a Lebanese bank. And so the answer, of course, is convert your lira while it's 1,500 to the dollar into dollars before the devaluation. right? Now, what can you do if you're a modern business person, right? If I can't convert to dollars, the next best thing is buy something tangible that won't lose 80% of its value overnight. Buy a boat, buy land. Traditionally, people bought other tangible assets, gold, right? Something like that. But if you buy an asset which is valued based upon its expected future cash flows that are in that collapsing currency, that doesn't work for you. Like you could own every good business in Venezuela. How's that going to help you when the Venezuelan currency collapses by a factor of 1 million? Jesus. It won't. Okay, so what's Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented. It's like gold with none of the defects of gold.
So define what the defects are. Why is it the greatest monetary invention?
So I buy $1 million of gold. Okay, if the price goes up, the gold miners, first of all, the gold miners are going to create more gold and dump it on the market. If I could eliminate all gold mining forever, if I could wave a magic wand and make it impossible to mine any more gold, my $1 million of gold will hold its value better because it'll be scarce. But gold miners are inflating the value of the supply of gold by at least 2% a year or so. And then if the price doubles again, investors will invest in more gold miners and they'll create more capacity to mine gold. So you'll create capacity to mine gold, you'll mine the gold, you'll crank up the rate at which the gold mines function. After that, people with gold jewelry will melt their jewelry down, convert it to gold bullion and sell it, right? If the price of gold went up by a factor of 20, you would be like converting all your gold stuff into gold bullion because it seems like a good idea. They call it scrap gold, right? And then after that, bankers will issue gold warrants and gold paper and gold derivatives, and they'll sell them short without the gold because they can speculate in it, and they don't have to have a one-for-one coverage of gold to the gold derivatives. And so that's called hypothecation and rehypothecation. Okay, if it keeps going up, the governments holding gold will start to sell some of their gold to manipulate the price down. Right, and all of these, and ultimately, if it goes up enough, someone will club you over the head and take your gold, or a hostile regime will take your gold, or a politician will pass a law taxing your gold. Right? There's a lot of ways you lose gold because it's physical. How do you cure the problem? Right? I mean, here's how you cure the problem. You make it impossible to mine any more gold, and then you make it possible to take custody of your gold personally off of the exchange or off of the bank. So that way the bank can't hypothecate it or rehypothecate it. Miners can't inflate it. Investors can't create any more gold miners. And then you make it possible to move it from here to Switzerland or Singapore in an hour for a nickel. And that way, if you don't like your bank or don't trust your bank, if the state of New York passes a law taxing it, you move it to the state of Wyoming. You know, if the government passes a law taxing, you know, the ownership of land in California, you can't move the land out of California, can you? If you have $1 million of gold in a bank and in a vault in New York City, you know, there's only a couple of places you can move it. You can move it to London if you have 6 months. Okay, so you're going to be subject to the law of London or the law of New York. Can you actually move to your favorite island, or, you know, can you move to the Cayman Islands and bury your gold underneath your hut in the Cayman Islands and be safe about it? Not likely. Can't even get it through the airport, right? So the problem with other properties, and gold is the simplest example, but the problem, the challenge or the analogy holds with any property. I give you a bunch of money and I tell you, you want to keep it and give it to your grandchild. Do you buy a building in Manhattan? Do you buy a ranch in California? Do you buy a stack of gold bars? Do you buy shares in a company headquartered in San Francisco? Do you buy bonds issued by a government or a company? Or do you buy Bitcoin? And you can see the problem, of course, is the debt is devaluing rapidly. The land in California can be taxed and is not movable. You know, the building in New York is not going anywhere. It might be valuable to a rich person that lives in New York. What about a rich person that lives in Beijing? Do they want your building in New York? How are you going to hide your building, right? Buildings get property taxed. There's a very famous story about, a bunch of luxury, yachts sitting in Sardinian port, and the locals decided that it wasn't fair that all these rich people were sitting on their yachts in the port, spending all this money, but they weren't paying enough taxes. Now, they were putting millions and millions of euros into the economy, but they came up with the idea that they were going to put a tax on the yacht, on the value of the yacht. And so they passed a yacht tax that would have cost people millions or tens of millions of euros if they stayed in that port. And everything was happy, and all the restaurateurs and the hotelers and the entertainment people in the port, they were all happy, making tons of money off the yachts until the day before the tax went into place. And the morning that the tax went into place, the port was empty and the economy died. Everybody left because yachts are floating capital. It just moves. It's floating property, right? So it's a very visible example, right? Why it's not that smart to put an unfair tax or an extreme tax on a yacht if people can float the yacht to the next port, 100 miles to the left. So one would be discouraged from taxing stuff that floats. On the other hand, taxing a building that's buried, 100 feet down in the bedrock, that's easier. You can't move the building. So Bitcoin represents the apex property rights of the human race. Like, I'm not disputing the ability or the, legitimacy of a government to pass a tax. At the end of the day, they can tax your gold, they can tax your stocks, your bonds, your building, yourself, your income, whatever they want. But the point really is you're a lot more likely to tax the stuff that you walk past, every day on the way to work. And legitimately, you can move yourself and you can move your property, if it's crypto, to another jurisdiction, but you can't legitimately move a ranch in California. So your property rights are stronger and the value of the property is higher. Right? You have a valuable thing in Manhattan. It's interesting to other wealthy people in Manhattan, but when you have Bitcoin, it's interesting to wealthy people everywhere on Earth.
Well, it's a great question, because I think what people don't realize is they look and they try to make these predictions to say, what's going to happen to ABC company? But wait a minute, what's going to happen to you? The guys at Goldman are going to be fine because the business changes and it's no longer business. See, as you have centralized control, business changes. So this becomes a command economy. So it matters how close you are to the power. So look at the Treasury secretaries and all these people. You see their resume, former Goldman Sachs. Well, I think they're going to be fine. The business changes. Now, what about the average person? What about the guy that's working, the woman that's working, that's saving, that's trying to invest, and they're using all the things they learned about in the 80s to make decisions today? That's the person that we're trying to talk to, right? That's the one that needs help.
I'm just asking us, what's the possibility of the banks disappearing, disintermediated?
I think the banks will look a lot different. You still need an interface between the consumer and a purchase. There's still going to be a payment processing function that goes on, or a credit extension. Because people love spending more than they earn, right?
It's more of a utility, utilitarian.
Well, let's talk about
so the banks that win are the ones that are able to have scale. So it's no longer about put the dollars in, loan them out. That's right. So you have less banks, Robert. So imagine you have a dozen banks. Now, right now there's about 7,000 banks in the country. It's way too many. So as this transition continues, you have far less banks.
So this is the reason I'm higher than a kite on Bitcoin, gold, silver, and the dollar and bullets. I want something they can't track. In other words, like today, one reason why gold is kind of interesting, in my opinion, is what's what I say today? Gold is for hoarding, silver is for spending. So Kim and I have a stash of silver and gold Brinks and stuff like this. But we ever needed to spend something, we'd go to Brinks, we'd get out our boxes of silver, and we would spend it. The Fed cannot track that. So I could walk into my hairdresser and say, I need some hair done, or whatever it is. So I think the value in the future, if, and this is if, they wipe out the banks and go central control, is the value may go to gold, Bitcoin, silver, and bullets, as long as they can't track it.
Cancer cure. Baking soda and pure maple syrup. There is not a tumor on God's green earth that cannot be licked with a little baking soda and maple syrup. That is the astonishing claim of controversial folk healer Jim Kellman, who says that this simple home remedy can stop and reverse the deadly growth of cancers. His loyal patients swear by the man they fondly call Dr. Jim and say he is a miracle worker. Those other doctors told me that I was a goner, and had less than 6 months to live as a result of my lung cancer, said farmer Ian Roadhouse. But Dr. Jim put me on his mixture, and in a couple of months, the cancer was gone. It didn't even show up on the X-rays. Dr. Jim discovered this treatment accidentally, somewhere in the middle of the last century when he was treating a family plagued by breast cancer. There were 5 sisters in the family and 4 of them had died of breast cancer. He asked the remaining sister if there was anything different in her diet, and she told him that she was partial to sipping maple syrup and baking soda. Since then, reported by a newspaper in Asheville, North Carolina, Dr. Jim dispensed this remedy to over 200 people diagnosed with terminal cancer, and amazingly 185 of them lived at least 15 more years, and nearly half enjoyed a complete remission. This treatment is a combination of pure, 100 organic maple syrup and baking soda. Many of the non-organic syrups are mixed with formaldehyde, even though they say pure cancer cells consume 15 times more glucose than normal cells. The cancer-killing baking soda is dragged into the cancer cell, along with the maple syrup, causing a very rapid shift in pH and oxygen levels, killing the cell. The actual formula is to mix 1 part baking soda with 3 parts pure, 100 maple syrup in a small saucepan. Stir briskly and heat the mixture for 5 minutes. Research suggests taking 1 teaspoon daily, but one could probably do this several times a day or mix it with some of the other therapies for faster results. The maple syrup apparently enables and increases penetration of bicarbonate into all compartments of body, even those which are difficult or impossible to penetrate by other means. These compartments include the central nervous system, the blood-brain barrier, joints, solid tumors, and perhaps even the eyes. Another home remedy is 1/4 teaspoon apple cider vinegar, and 1/4 teaspoon baking soda taken 2 or more times daily. Another treatment is lemon and baking soda, or lime and baking soda and water. Perhaps honey could be substituted for maple syrup, or those who live in parts of the world where maple syrup is not available, but to my knowledge, no one has experimented with this. We do know that blackstrap molasses works. Baking soda increases pH, which in turn increases oxygen levels in the body. Breathing exercises are also critical to increasing oxygen levels to the point of killing cancer cells quickly as well. See breathing exercises. Pure silver concentrate is a broad-spectrum preventative agent. It destroys yeast and bacteria in as little as 15 seconds and kills the viruses and mold that may also cause cancer. Stir briskly and heat the mixture for 5 minutes. Research suggests taking 1 teaspoon daily, but one could probably do this several times a day, or mix it with some of the other therapies for faster results. The maple syrup apparently enables and increases penetration of bicarbonate into all compartments of the body, even those which are difficult or impossible to penetrate by other means. These compartments include the central nervous system, the blood-brain barrier, joints, solid tumors, and perhaps even the eyes. Another home remedy is 1/4 teaspoon apple cider vinegar, and 1/4 teaspoon baking soda taken 2 or more times daily. Another treatment is lemon and baking soda, or lime and baking soda in water. Perhaps honey could be substituted for maple syrup, or those who live in parts of the world where maple syrup is not available, but to my knowledge, no one has experimented with this. We do know that blackstrap molasses works. Baking soda increases pH, which in turn increases oxygen levels in the body. Breathing exercises are also critical to increasing oxygen levels to the point of killing cancer cells quickly as well. Pure silver concentrate is a broad-spectrum preventative agent. It destroys yeast and bacteria in as little as 15 seconds, and kills the viruses and mold that may also cause cancer.